What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Fall of X and Children of the Vault. Now, as always, if you need to get caught up, you'll find a link to the Fall of X playlist at the end of this video. But the long and short of what's going on is that while the main Fall of X event deals with Orchis, right, the anti-mutant government organization tracking down the X-Men and all these different mutants from across the world and trying to kill them everywhere they can, there's a whole other plot taking place here, which is that a group called the Children of the Vault, basically hyper-evolved humans, are essentially conquering the world. And that's where this picks up, because Cable and Bishop, right, two mutants, and all this rests on their shoulders, have basically figured out what was going on. And what they did is they actually set a kind of event unfolding where even Orchis themselves became aware of the Children of the Vault. And in doing so, it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they're all basically attacking the Children of the Vault at the same time. Now, what we're told here, right, squatting on the surface of the sun, the reconstructed Orchis mother mold births 1,000 sentinel suns an hour, literally 1,000 sentinels an hour, these giant mutant hunting robots, right? They're the main body of the Orchis attack force, inexhaustible cavalry, artillery, and infantry all in one. From the Reforge, these repurposed mutant murder machines are sent directly to the city and Tomorrow Towns all over the planet. Tomorrow Towns basically being these towns that have been taken over by the Children of the Vault and kind of operate as like hubs for those individuals who have been taken over by the virus, right? And so what you end up getting here is this guy who just kind of shows up out of nowhere. Now, this is one of the guys from the Children of the Vault, right? From the city itself. You don't really see him all that often, right? But like this dude is a mutant who's just kind of shown up here, right? One of the guys asks, like, what's your name, kid? And he says, it's a secret. They say it's bad, that I should be ashamed, but I can't help it. And when this guy says, stay back, what are you holding? Like, what is that in your hand? He says, the future. Do you want to see? And he says, Muerte. My name is Muerte, right? That means like death, murder, what have you in Spanish. He basically blows up the entirety of the Orchis facility. Now, for those of you guys who have been following the Fall of X, that's no small thing, because it's quite possible Marvel literally just ended the entirety of the Fall of X event in a tie-in comic, which is crazy. Not the first time they've done it, but it's kind of a crazy thing. At that point, you switch over to Serafina. Now, the way it works with the Children of the Vault in the here and now is you've kind of got like two individuals who are vying for power within the Children of the Vault itself. The first one is Serafina, who has more of like a diplomatic approach to different situations, right? She thinks things through, the whole nine yards. The other one is Capitan. He's a lot more reckless, right? He's more just like go in, guns blazing, shoot first, ask questions later. This calls for diplomacy. And the reason why is because Cable, right? This time-traveling mutant from the future with just crazy Omega level powers of telepathy and even telekinesis has a gun pointed at the city itself, right? The main hub, the mainframe. If that thing gets destroyed, the entirety of the city comes crashing down. Now, why does that matter? Because the nature of the Children of the Vault is that with them being hyper-evolved, it's done by the city, right? Like massive amounts of time pass within the city itself. Technically, Serafina is thousands of years old, even though she's only ever been around for a few years, because when they go into the vault, basically time passes differently. She can be killed, she can be brought back, right? And her powers can be enhanced. Whatever weaknesses or whatever it was that killed her before can basically be neutralized in like the newest version, so she'll be immune to it. Very similar to like Doomsday from DC Comics is a really good example here. But the thing about this is that if that city mainframe gets destroyed, everything's done and gone. And so what you get is this statement from Serafina where she says, you're supposed to be a mutant freedom fighter and now you work with sapient supremacists. I'm disappointed. And the response of Cable is, something you'll learn about me, I work with whoever I have to, even the devil himself. And where she asks, but why? They murdered your entire race, they're genocidal savages. His response is, well, that's why I wanted to introduce you. You've got so much in common. Now, that's one of the things to understand is that Cable, as a guy, right? This dude has seen some stuff, right? Like the war between himself and like Strife, basically his clone in the future, right? This guy's lived through some really dark times in the future. He is battle hardened. So someone like Serafina popping up isn't really somebody that he's going to like concern himself with in the extreme. He's more concerned about like what the children are doing as a whole, as opposed to the individual children themselves. And so the result of this is that Capitan shows up and immediately starts trying to attack Cable. Now he does kind of get the upper upper hand on him, and he does get like a punch, and of course he is like holding him up. But again, that's where like Serafina and her diplomacy comes into play, right? Capitan is, you could loosely call him a Superman analog, not necessarily, not in the exact same sense, not like Hyperion, the Sentry, Blue Marvel, anybody along those lines, but he is incredibly capable. And the thing about this is that unlike Serafina, who wants to talk all this out, his response is like, this world is ours, right? It was promised to us. Like, we are going to take this planet over and there's nothing you can do. And the thing about Cable's response here is that's never going to happen, right? Well, of course, Capitan fires back and simply says like, it's over, right? Orchis is finished and the message has reached the final stage ahead of schedule, right? All these people who have been infected with this quote unquote virus are people who are now basically servants of the children of the vault. They're taking over the planet has more or less been successful. There's seemingly nothing that can be done to stop it. Now, philosophically, you could actually see where they're making a good case here. The whole idea behind the Children of the Vault is to basically neutralize any and all conflicts that exist out there. Everybody's serving and operating under one single ideology. Does it remove free will? Sure, but like free will in the Marvel Universe as it exists right now, are people waging war against each other? How useful could free will possibly be to the betterment of the human race in Marvel? So it's one of these things where it's like getting rid of it may be the best thing for humanity because look what they've done with it so far. So it's like, it's really, really cool, right? It's a really cool concept and it creates some really interesting philosophical arguments, right? The whole case that Capitan makes is he says, it will all be over soon. Thinks lose, finally, shifting to coherent light, the world slows to a brilliant crawl. In this form, she cannot imagine the darkness. Everywhere she looks, there is light. She allows the humans' sluggish projectiles to pass harmlessly through her and dives deep into the dark pools of their eyes, burning up the optic nerves and turning all 12 of their brains to ash before they can process the sight of her, right? Because she just moves that fast, right? One of the members of the Children of the Vault. That's the thing. The Children of the Vault are ridiculously overpowered. So much so that that's why Cable and Bishop are doing what they're doing. The Children of the Vault by themselves in their current form would be more than enough to dominate most all of the human race and even all the X-Men who were out there, which is the reason why their mission had to be one that was covert and it had to be a mission of subterfuge. Now, fortunately for Cable, who's almost done with all his living thanks to the aggression of Capitan, Bishop shows up and saves him, right? And when that happens, the response of Serafina is like, Bishop, Cable, what do you hope to accomplish here? The human race has hours. The mutant race is already over. And the response of Capitan is, why is it so hard for you to understand? We are the future. You can't fight the future. The response of Cable and Bishop is the best response ever. Actually, we're known for it, right? Because that's literally their thing. Bishop comes from a future where you basically had Hope Summers, who's not overly important to this story, but basically instigated something called like, what was it, like the 6-second war or whatever it is, where she like massacred 1 million humans in like 6 seconds, like wiped them all out. That jump-started the Sentinel program, very similar to Days of Future Past. And then that led to the mutant population and the human population joining forces and throwing the Sentinels off. That M that he has on his face, that's the brand for mutants. That's how they determined who is a mutant and who is a human. Cable, we already ran over his story. So both of these guys come from incredibly dark futures and their stories are like trying to keep those futures from happening. So they're always fighting the future. That's their whole thing, right? The response of Serafina is you're only delaying the inevitable. And the response of Cable is more like stalling for time. But Nurse Hetty says it won't be long now. We're ahead of schedule too, right? 3, 2, 1. And that's when the entirety of the city just starts going haywire, right? Error codes and all kinds of stuff. What that does is it switches over to a guy named Diamante, the living memory. Now, one of the things to know about this is that this guy is quite literally a living backup, right? A walking, talking computer system that holds all the information about everything that seemingly ever happened with the city itself, right? The ultimate historian, the future's past personified. 100,000 years flow through his crystal veins, so he is shocked to find for the first time something new in the perfect lattice of his body, the guy's entire physical form starts to mutate, right? It starts to turn to machinery. And what we end up finding out and what Cable had done is that, for those of you guys who are curious, Cable's arm is what's called the technorganic virus. It's one of the reasons why you don't see him using his telepathy and telekinesis all that often, because he's constantly using both of those powers in conjunction to keep the technorganic virus from eating him alive. If he wasn't able to do that, he would literally just be consumed by it. It would convert his cells to machinery and he would die. And that's always happening 100% of the time. What he ended up doing here, right? And what he says is, he says 1,000 years in the future, there's a quiet little timeline where everything is the phalanx and the phalanx is everything. As a younger, less cautious man, I risked assimilation to get a sample of the super strain of the techno-organic virus that was used to convert that universe. What does that mean? One of the things you guys may recall from the beginning of this whole X-Men run, not even just the fall of X, but going all the way back to Jonathan Hickman's House and Powers of X, the idea is that at some point in the future, the Children of the Vault would succeed in taking over the world. They would win. And what they would end up doing is actually merging with humanity, and that in doing so, they would create what was in effect a Babel Spire. Because what that would do is it would draw the attention of the Phalanx Covenant, kind of like Marvel's equivalent of the Borg, for those of you guys who watch Star Wars. But if you don't, basically they're just like living machinery. But at that point in the future, when that future was written by Hickman and the future that Cable's talking about here, they just travel the cosmos and literally convert every single planet out there that succeeded in creating a Babel Spire, which is basically them just shouting out into the ether, hey, we're ready to become part of the Phalanx consciousness. That's effectively what it is when you make a Babel Spire. Unless it's Annihilation Conquest, then it's forced on you and you're just converted into Phalanx, or you're disintegrated and converted into food, which is pretty wild here. And so what Cable had done is that in securing a small sample of this, he infected the entirety of the city. And he says, I've been keeping a sample of this under the X-Men mansion. Bishop picked it up a week ago. And what he says is like, this gun is not simply just a gun. This thing is a syringe. The reality here is you've only got a couple of options. Either you guys can retreat and you can deal with this whole infection that's taking place in your city, because only 10% of it's infected right now. But if you don't, if you choose to continue fighting this fight, it will form a Babel Spire and it will send a signal to the Technarch, right? A Cabal world that feeds on solar systems. You'll destroy us and yourselves in the process. And it's a pretty smart maneuver to make here. And the reason why is because if for no other reason than self-preservation and the fact that the Children of the Vault do not have a means to leave Earth and go to like other planets that exist out there in the universe, they basically say, okay, right, we're gonna go back and we're gonna do our thing. But what ends up happening is the whole case that they make here is like, you think you've won. The original techno-organic virus is in our database. The city is fighting your infection. We will develop a cure long before it can generate a spire. And so what they say is, here's the other part of this. We figured you guys would have something like this. So we took a second step. We wired the entirety of your birthing place, right? Where you basically create offspring. We have wired that entire place with oblivion bombs. I press this one button and the entire generation that comes after you, all that genetic information is gone. All of you get wiped out. Now Capitan immediately goes to race in and attack these guys, but that's where Serafina's like, stop, right? And the response is like, what do you propose? And it's like, leave, take your message and your city and return to the vault. Never come back here. And so it's one of those things where like, they don't really have a choice, because as all this is going down, and that's where Capitan's like, you're bluffing, right? Like, you're not going to kill a world just to defeat us. But that's where Serafina's like, no, yeah, he's definitely right. There's no way the X-Men would do something like this. And the response of Bishop is, X-Men, no. The X-Men were pushed into a meat grinder, my friend. There are no X-Men anymore. There's just two old soldiers with nothing to lose. So what do you think's going to happen here? Do you really believe that we won't kill a world to stop you? Do you really believe that's not going to happen? Because if you do, keep fighting the good fight and we'll all go out in a blaze of glory. But if there's one part of you that really wants to survive here, then do what we tell you to. And that's exactly what happens. The Children of the Vault race back to the vault itself. They effectively retreat, right? It's like, we cannot risk the future. That cannot happen. They retreat, they shut down the message. Everybody out there who was infected, they all go back to normal. Humanity just kind of returns to a regular state. But something to understand here, this is not the end of the Children of the Vault, because Serafina, before they leave, she gives them a parting word. She says, Capitan was right. I see I was too gentle, too magnanimous in this incarnation. I suspect I won't be in the future. We could have saved them, you know. Something unthinkable is coming. I've seen it. We could have saved all of humanity and even you. The response of Bishop is, we'll take our chances. The city ultimately folds up and it returns back to the vault, and everything goes back to what passes for normal in the Marvel universe. But that's one of the things to know here is the Children of the Vault were the good guys in this story. They were going to save humanity, and they were going to save what was left of the mutant population, because if you guys have been paying attention to the news in Marvel, what is coming is very dark and very bleak. And by the time that hits, the X-Men, humanity, they will pray for death before the end. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. If you guys need to get caught up on Fall of X, make sure you click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.